All right, so welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Jacqueline Sayano. I am the director here at Inspired Instruction, and this is our monthly webinar series. This month, our focus is on classroom management, and this webinar is titled Classroom Management, Setting the Stage for Highly Effective Teaching. So I did just put a link in the chat. It's a tiny URL. It is our handout for today. So there's a couple of things in there that are helpful, in terms of notes, so you don't have to notes, and then also some links to some of the downloads that I'm going to be sharing today that we find that are really helpful in regards to classroom management. Now, I know everybody is tight on time because all teachers and educators are tight on time right now. So I am going to get started. So for those of you who are just joining us, that's great. All right, so our agenda and our goal for this webinar is I want to share some best practices and strategies that if you're a teacher, you can use in the classroom. If you're a coach or an administrator, you can turnkey to teachers as you work with them. In general, focusing on classroom management, and we're going to hit the main points of, what do we have to think about when we talk about classroom management basics? So that's physical classroom space, procedures, routines, and transitions, and then behavior and the environment. So the goal is to have you walk away from this webinar today with some maybe hopefully new tools and strategies that you can either use yourself or turnkey to the teachers with whom you work. So we at Inspired Instruction, we look at this based on 5 components of effective classroom management, and all of this is research-based. So if you look at it, just take a second and read through these, and then I'll talk about each very briefly. So when we're looking at what do we think when we say, okay, that teacher uses effective classroom management skills. So 5 components in general that are kind of the overarching umbrella topics. First one is they have effective working relationships with their students. Secondly, they have trained their students in some way to follow processes, procedures, routines on how learning should and will take place in that particular classroom. The third one is time. They're able to not only use their time effectively, but leverage it to their advantage. Fourth is being able to anticipate student behaviors. So that a lot of that comes with lesson planning or self-reflection. What do I do if? And having a plan in place so that we are proactive and not reactive. And then the 5th is establishing standards of behavior that promote student learning. So all students know what is expected of them, and there's no surprises when they're in that particular classroom. So the first topic I want to talk about is physical classroom space, because really when you think about classroom management, everything occurs in that classroom. So the physical aspects of that classroom are super important. So in the chat, I just want you to write number 1 or number 2. Which space do you think is more conducive to learning? So just put in the chat either a number 1 or a number 2. I'll give you a second to do that. Thank you for your participation. I appreciate it. Excellent. So everybody put number 2. So obviously the picture on the left is an exaggeration, but there is a connection between an organized classroom that runs like a well-oiled machine and then the learning that takes place within it. So your classroom might not always be neat and tidy, like the one on the right. It might not, like my classroom never looked like that, but there should always be an underlying structure and organization that promotes learning. So if we're thinking key considerations as a teacher, as a coach, as an administrator, when you walk into a classroom and you're thinking about physical classroom space, we're thinking about how is the furniture arranged? Where are classroom resources? Where are technology resources? Where are the student supplies? Do the students have easy access to all of the things that they need? And then does the teacher have all the easy access to all the things that he or she needs? So that's what we're thinking about. It's basically all these different concepts. So some of the qualities of a well-organized classroom, we have desks that are arranged that it encourages both collaboration, whether that's whole group and small group, as well as independent work. We have desks that are arranged so that there's a clear view of all the learning resources the students might need. So if you're going to be doing a lot of your teaching from a smartboard in the front of the room, then we have to make sure that even if the students are arranged in groups, that they do have a clear view of that smartboard, regardless of where they're sitting. There's space provided for student items. So I think this is something that mostly elementary school teachers consider, but I taught high school for a long time. My students came in with backpacks and who had their gym bag because they were going right from class to practice, and water bottles and things like that. So it is important to have space for students' items, especially if you don't want them cluttering up your floor. So in my classroom, I had a radiator against the window and there was like a ledge in front of it. So I set up space for students to put their oversized items there during the class period, because we did get up and move around a lot. We were doing center work. We were getting up and acting out plays and things like that. So I wanted to make sure nobody was going to trip and fall. And also that students were able to get up, get a textbook, get up, sharpen their pencil, get up, come to the board without falling over anything. Which leads to the next one, high traffic areas are kept clear. So anything we can do to make sure there are clear paths to those supplies and resources that we should have readily available to students. So that might be, you have a desk at the front of your room that has extra pens and pencils. My desk in the front of the room had like Spanish English dictionaries, Creole English dictionaries for my ELL students. It might be like your tissues, your hand sanitizer, but the things that students are going to need are readily available and the students can get there without falling over things, and more importantly, without disrupting the entire class. And the same thing goes for teaching materials. If you know you're going to need chart paper and markers and the teacher textbook and whatever you're going to need, all of that should be readily available so that you're not running around trying to find things and you don't know where they are. So if I pause there for 1 second, so a lot of those things have to do with furniture and supplies. And it seems like a silly place to start off a webinar on classroom management, but I'm a big believer that if your classroom is not organized, not neat, doesn't have to be neat and tidy, but it has to be organized so that everyone knows where things are and everyone knows an easy way to get to them without disrupting the class. That does tie into the other things we're going to be talking about. So coming off of that, routines and procedures, which we're going to talk about shortly, are clearly posted. Again, wherever students have line of sight, we don't want them in the back corner. If everybody's back is going to be to them, then that's not a helpful place for them to be. And then we have dedicated wall space, and that can be for anchor charts, that could be for word walls, that could be for your objectives. But again, in a place where students can see what they need to see, that's going to be helpful for them during the class. So for me, when my students walked in, I had them grouped in groups of 3 or 4, but everybody's desk was facing towards the front of the room, and towards the front of the room is where I had my smartboard. On the side, I had chart paper next to the smartboard that had the day's objectives. My anchor charts and my word walls were all up on that front wall. And then stuff like student work, things that they didn't necessarily have to see in order to get the most out of a lesson, that was arranged in other places around the room. But the things that they needed were in line of sight from where they were sitting. Okay, so this leads us to our next part. So let's pretend our classroom is super organized. Everybody knows where everything is. It's easily accessible. We're not falling over each other or other things. We're not disrupting the class because we need a tissue. Now, the next part of classroom management is procedures, routines, and transitions. So this is make a plan and then work the plan. So there is a small difference between procedure and routine. So in definition, and this is from Teach Like a Champion, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, a procedure is basically the design. So the teacher establishes this design saying, this is the way we are going to run the classroom. This is the way we are going to act when there's a fire drill. This is the way we are going to act when we have to hand in homework. And then it becomes a routine when that procedure becomes automatic. So students do not need constant reminders of, okay, now it's time to put your homework over here. Okay, you can go up and get a tissue. They're right here. It becomes rote that these students know, okay, oh, all right, it's time to hand in homework. I know exactly where to go. I go put it in the folder up front. Or I need to ask to go to the bathroom. I'm not going to disrupt Dr. Sayano. I know that there's a sign-in book in the back and there's a pass. So it's, you know, automatically they're doing these things without teacher prompting. So the goal is to make these procedures into routines. So I'd like you to unmute for 1 second. Again, your choice if you want to be on camera or not, because we are recording. But if you could unmute and give me maybe one idea, what's something in the classroom that needs a procedure or a routine? Does anybody have any thoughts?
I used to use one, I mean, I know this seems silly, but for housekeeping purposes, sorry, all 3 of my children are home. Something as simple as getting up and throwing out the garbage.
Perfect. So what do I do when I have trash and I need to throw it out? Excellent. Thank you. What else? Something else that would possibly need a procedure or a routine in the classroom?
I can share.
Thanks.
When a student needs a help from a teacher doing independent work.
Perfect. Perfect. What do I do if I need help during independent work time? Perfect. Any other thoughts? What else would need a procedure or a routine?
Even for science, like when you're doing a lab, like how to gather the materials and where to put them back and dispose of them.
Perfect. Yep. And that goes for multiple art, anything that requires more than, your normal amount of supplies. What do I do with these when I'm done with them? Where do I get them if I need more? Excellent. Anybody have any other thoughts on things that might need a procedure or a routine?
Small group instruction.
Small group instruction. Excellent. And that's a big one. And I think, a lot of us, if not all of us, implement small group instruction. And I always say to new teachers when I coach them, students don't know automatically how to work in small groups. That's something that needs to be taught. We can't just put them in a group of 4 and say, here, go do this. They just don't know how. So it is important that that becomes a procedure and then a routine, how to work in small groups. Excellent. Thanks so much for sharing. I appreciate it. So other things you might not necessarily consider that would need a procedure or a routine, getting the attention of your class. So this is especially important during transition times. So we're shifting from, we just did our do now, and now we're going to start our mini lesson. And they're wild and they're crazy and they're talking to each other and they're bouncing around the room. How do I get their attention? Moving about the room. Let's say we're doing a gallery walk or we're doing centers. What are the procedures for that? Leaving the room. If I have to go to the bathroom, get a drink, the nurse, whatever, what are the procedures for leaving the room? Sharpening pencils, getting supplies, like a couple of you just mentioned, even throwing out trash. Working in groups, like I just mentioned, very important. Handling distractions and interruptions. Yeah, we know that never happens, right? In the classroom, you never have a fire drill or someone buzzes in over the intercom or the phone rings, or there's, the lawnmower is going outside, there's a mouse, something like that. You can't prepare for every single distraction or interruption, but you can prepare for some of them, like a fire drill or like the bell ringing. I always used to say the bell doesn't dismiss you, I do. So we always had a signal for the end of the classroom, and that kept them in their seats. So even if the bell rang, if I didn't say that they could go, they weren't going anywhere. So it is important to have procedures for things like that as well. Snow, Christina just wrote snow. It starts snowing outside, everybody panics. So I think things like this, again, there's some things that you can predict and turn procedures into routines, like, hey, yes, it's raining, it's snowing, it's thundering, we're inside, we're safe, we don't need to focus on what's going outside. So it's a lot of it is, expressing your expectations as well. Transitioning from one activity to another, going from do now to writing assignment, going from do now to centers, whatever it happens to be. And finishing work early, because we do all have those students where we're working on independent activity and they finish before. There should be some kind of routine in place, whether that is, you have a computer program, they can go on the laptop and open up a computer program like IXL, or you have journal entries or extra credit. Something should be set up ahead of time. So also you're not scrambling like, oh no, these kids finish this much faster than I thought they would, and I have nothing else for them to do. So these are the types of things that will make your classroom run more smoothly, knowing that the students know, okay, if I have to do this, I do this. If this happens, I do this. So a lot of it is just getting them into the habit of how do I do these things. So one of the documents that I put in the handout that I shared, we had created this ultimate back to school routines and procedures checklist. And it's pretty much all of the things we talked about and then some. So all the things we could think of that in our many vast years of experience collaboratively, what were things that we had routines and procedures for, things that made our classrooms run more smoothly, where the students needed to know this is what we do, this is how we act, this is how we respond. And you can see we divided it up by, morning, end of day, general classroom, academic, transition. So the link to this is in your handout. I do find it really helpful, whether you're a novice teacher or a veteran teacher. There are definitely things that I looked at this and I'm like, you know what? I probably didn't have great procedures and routines in place for, homework. And maybe that's something I could improve upon. So it does help even with the teacher metacognition, figuring out, okay, how could I make my classroom management skills better? So again, the link to that is in your handout. I find it really helpful. All right, so we know we have to have routines and procedures, and the next question is how to teach them. So I like to compare this to like being on an airplane. So when you get on an airplane, how many times have you seen, yes, I know how to put a seatbelt on. Yes, I know how to do what to do with the oxygen mask. The reason we know that is if you've flown multiple times, they do the same procedure every single time, and then it becomes a routine, right? So the set procedure is explained and modeled. They show you this is how you put on your oxygen mask. This is how you buckle this. So if you've flown a few times, oh, well, yeah, I know how to do this because they've modeled and demonstrated to you. Same thing goes for in the classroom. So those procedures need to be not only in print and available. So whether that's in your syllabus, preferably hanging somewhere in the classroom, maybe in a student contract, they need to happen in the classrooms. That means every procedure has to be explained, rehearsed, reinforced. Again, I taught high school and I would make my students practice, how to come into the classroom. So at that time, they knew they had to come in, they had to say good morning or good afternoon to me because I was there at the door. They would put their cell phones in a little holder that I had because my district allowed that at the time. They would go get their journals. They would go to their seats and start their do now and read the objectives that were on the board. But I had to practice that every day with them for about a week. And these are high school students, so about a week to get them to that. I didn't have to tell them. And by week 2 and week 3, they were automatically coming in and doing that process without me having to say anything. So that is the goal, right? Is that for very little teacher intervention when it comes to these procedures and routines. So again, to recap, we want to explain the procedure, post it on the wall, explain it, write it down, demonstrate it. This is how we do it. Have them rehearse it, make sure you monitor their behavior, reteach it if you need to, and then you reinforce it. Practice, reinforcement until it becomes a routine and you don't have to intercede anymore. The other thing that has to do with all of these things that we've been talking about, whether it's, how the classroom's set up or just in general procedures and routines, is time. I think time was always my enemy as a teacher. I always felt like I didn't have enough time to do things. And we know that teaching, a big part of it is effectively managing your instruction time. So I do want to show you a very, very short video that I really do like. And I think it just kind of emphasizes why it's important and a way to do this.
That's time. All right.
I do like to use a timer because I feel like if you give students too much time to do a task, then the task drags out and they don't stay focused as much as they should. So the timer really helps them with that concrete, this is how much time you have, it's gonna go off. You need to be done when the timer goes off.
You guys done? You're done with the math here? Yeah, you're finishing your totals?
So it'd be like right about there.
What? Yeah.
It's for me too, because I can get so caught up as a teacher in going around and checking in at each table and like really looking at the kids, and I can get a little caught up in that and lose track of time. And so it helps keep me on task. And then for the students, the timer really helps give them the concrete, this is when it's done.
That is it. So, finish up.
Just helps them stay on task and it helps keep them focused. And I feel like that sort of little bit of pressure helps push the kids a little bit.
So again, super short, but I do like it. Ooh, I don't want to play it again. I didn't like it that much. Thank you very much. I like that she has a clean start and a clean finish, right? We're starting now, and then when that timer goes off, we're done. And I love how she mentions that even as teachers, it's easy for us to get distracted, right? Who needs our help? Someone's calling on the intercom. I have 5 minutes, maybe I can grade these quizzes real quick. Having a timer displayed on the board, on the smart board, whatever it happens to be, it definitely helps focus not only the students, but the teacher. So when we're using a timer, we definitely want to make sure we're showing the clock. All the research we've read says to use odd increments of time. And I think that's just because it gives them, the students, just a very, I have 7 minutes instead of 5 minutes. It's just it's much more specific. And then we definitely want to make sure that we're setting goals with the students in terms of, okay, I'm giving you 5 minutes. This is what needs to happen at the end of 5 minutes. And then Rabia just put in the chat, the timer also helps avoid the constant interruptions of how much time do we have left. It's up there, it's displayed, right? We have 30 seconds, we have 3 minutes. So it definitely does help. So some of our favorite apps, Google Timer is actually an add-on that if you use Google Suite, you can use that. And then again, in the handout that I shared, and I'll share again at the end for those of you who came in late, I put some other ones that we really like, and they're simple. It's just, again, a way to keep your students on track, part of your routine that we know as students, the teacher is going to give us a set amount of time and a goal, and this is what needs to be done. So it gets rid of that chaos. It gets rid of that free time of what are we supposed to be doing? Because I know every teacher loves that question. And it's up there. We got 4 minutes and 27 seconds left. And Dr. Sayano said we have to have this done by the end of 5 minutes. So I do very strongly promote the use of timers in the classroom. Getting the attention of the class. This is definitely something that needs a procedure and then a routine. I wouldn't use all of these things. I would pick one that works for you. So it could be, and I think a lot of this depends on the age of your students. So it could be like, if you hear my voice, clap once. It could be, and a hush fell over the crowd and everyone goes, shh. It could be any like sound that you want to make. Some teachers turn the light off. Some teachers hold their hand up, and when they hold the hand up, the students know they have to quiet down. It's basically whatever works for you. You might already have something, but whatever you decide, the key point is making sure that you practice it with your students so that they know you clap, you raise your hand, whatever the secret word is, whatever it happens to be, they know immediately that is time to give their full attention to the front of the room. So a lot of times what I used to do is I used to stand up on a chair. So when it was time to, or all of a sudden we got distracted, because it's going to happen. Even if you have the best classroom management skills in the world, students get distracted. It might start snowing, whatever it happens to be. If my students got like that, I had a chair up in the front of the room, I would just stand up on it. And then when they saw me up there, they all stopped talking. And that was our routine that we practiced. Accessing supplies and paperwork. So we did talk about this before in terms of how we set up our classroom. There are lots of ways that you can make this more seamless so that it does improve your classroom management skills. I used to put numbers on the desks, and wherever you were sitting, that was the number in terms of the textbook you were going to get, or the group you were in, or the folder you needed to pick up. If your students are sitting in groups, you could have one student in each group in charge of go get the textbooks for the class, come up and pick up chart paper for your group, whatever it happens to be. So whatever is going to work best for you to make the transition periods, to make getting supplies and paperwork more seamless, just find a process that works for you. And these are just some ideas. Having a central supply station, having individual supplies, group supply caddies in the middle of the desks, whatever works best for you. And, it depends on how your school functions, what your supply situation is. So these are all things to keep in mind. I know as an English teacher, distributing and collecting paperwork was the most chaotic part of my day. I had, over the course of the day, 120 students, all, who was absent, who's turning in late work, who's turning in the assignment early, who's turning in the on-time assignment. So it's definitely helpful to think about how can I streamline that process. For me, I taught 6 periods. So each period had a folder up on the wall, and they didn't have to come and give me anything, because I always told them, don't put anything on my desk. My desk eats paperwork, because if it gets on my desk, it could get covered under, who comes in to drop me off something else, and then I never find it again. So I had folders on the wall, period 1, 2, 3, 4, and they knew to put their stuff in there. I also had a very specific routine for how do we label our work. Because if you have a lot of students like I did, and even if you don't, even if you have 20 students, if someone doesn't put their name on something or they don't label it in terms of what it is, it can get very confusing when it's time to grade. And grading is stressful enough. So we want to make sure we have routines and procedures in place so that at least collecting their work and being able to organize it for ourselves to grade it is not so chaotic. You might have a central pickup and drop off location. I had that for journals. All their journals were in one bin in the front of the room. I had one person in charge of distributing journals every period. And then always, and I think we learned this from COVID, we leverage our digital resources the best we can. So maybe we're not having them hand in paper homework. Maybe they're submitting it in a Dropbox or on Google Drive. Whatever works best for you, but the more organized your procedures and your routines are for supplies and paperwork, the more managed your classroom is going to feel, the less craziness in terms of there's papers all over the place. I don't know whose they are. And also your students will just know that this is my teacher's expectation and that I need to get on it. I need to make sure that I'm following the expectations that are set forth by my teacher in order to be successful in the classroom. And the last piece I want to talk about, and then I'll open it up to questions, behavior and environment. So we know that mindset is everything. So we definitely want to make sure that we are creating a positive environment. And it kind of all fits in, right? You have this organized classroom, you have procedures and routines that you've put into place for your students. All of this automatically demonstrates a mutual respect for your students, that I respect you as students, that I want you to have an organized, fulfilling educational experience, right? So in order to create a positive environment, we want to focus on a couple of things, making sure that we're providing respect and that we're getting respect back, using positive reinforcement, setting high expectations, which goes hand in hand with setting those routines and procedures, delegating responsibility to the students. And that might be just so-and-so, you're in charge of handing out the journals, so I don't have 26 kids up at once all looking for their journals. Self-efficacy and locus of control. And that's hard for some of us. Some of us are very used to being the sage on the stage. It is important that we are giving the students some control over their education. And that might just be a little bit of student choice or just promoting group work, trying to remind them, hey, these are the routines we set forth for group work. They're displayed on the wall. How could you better improve how you're doing this? So again, a lot of it all ties in with reiteration, making sure that everybody's following these procedures that we've set forth. And that does allow you to give up some control because they're able to take over the control with the routines and the procedures. And then a growth mindset. And I think this is particularly important. We're still in September and October, promoting that growth mindset, even when it comes to routines and procedures. Because you'll have the student, oh, I forgot I'm supposed to put my homework over there. That's okay. Let's practice it and you'll get there. So just promoting all of these things, they all go hand in hand with making your classroom a more organized and well-managed place. One of the things I really like, and there's also a link to this in your handout, a student-led classroom contract. So this one that we created, I really love because it gives the students a place to brainstorm using a Y chart. So a great classroom environment should look like, sound like, and feel like. So it gives them some control of what do they want their educational experience in your classroom to look like, sound like, and feel like. But then it also puts the onus on them. What is your responsibility as a student? And then what do you think the teacher's responsibility is? And again, this is something that depending on the age of your students, you might want to do, one-on-one or small group conferences to talk to them about, well, what do you think my responsibilities are and your responsibilities are? And again, it's not too late to do this now, even though it's September, end of September, you definitely could still implement this now. and then the teacher and the student both sign it. And it's basically also a behavior prevention piece that if the student does some kind of infraction, you can pull back out that classroom contract and say, oh, you wrote down your responsibility is to pay attention during class. Were you just doing that? So it also does, it forces the students to take onus, of their behavior. And it also gives you and them some metacognition of, okay, well, what are our responsibilities? How do we work together? Are we doing that effectively? Because some days we know it's just not effective. It gives us something to go back to look at and say, okay, so maybe we need to reconsider what our student and teacher responsibilities are as a class. So the link to this is in your handout. I really like this as well as a fun activity. And again, does promote all those aspects of the positive environment. Student engagement. So we want our students active. We want our students engaged in whatever activities we're doing. But this does tie directly to classroom management because we don't want them to be doing something different every 3 minutes because then it can become chaotic. So we do want to consider how engaged are our students going to be during every point of the lesson. And we want to try to limit our direct instruction to 5 to 15 minutes if you're thinking of like a 40-minute period, because this way they're not getting bored from the direct instruction and because they're not engaged. And it also, they are able to use those routines and procedures that you've taught them to easily transition to different things. So it might be direct instruction for 10 minutes. And now we know our routines and procedures. We are going to switch to centers, or we're going to switch to independent work. And you want to make sure that when you're thinking about that classroom organization piece, that your classroom is set up to maximize engagement. So there are obviously multiple options for this. You could have, students in rows where they're easily able to turn their desks and work collaboratively. You could have a U-shape, you could have small groups. Again, it's whatever works with your space and the age of your students. I usually switched between the U-shape and the small groups. And there were plenty of weeks where the students came in and every day the desks were arranged in a different way, depending on what we were doing. So the goal is to make sure whatever you are doing that day, that week, that lesson, that those desks are arranged so that students have, again, clear line of sight of the teacher and any materials they need. And then also that they are able to engage with each other. So again, you can have them in rows as long as they know that when it's time for partner work, they just turn to the left or they turn clockwise or whatever it happens to be. It just has to become part of your procedures and your routines. And then the last thing I wanted to share with you is the other thing we had created, because we do know that, teacher burnout is real, and a lot of it does come from classroom management. We had created this administrator's checklist for classroom management challenges. I think it's equally as effective for teachers, that if you want to engage in some self-reflection, some metacognition, and say, okay, if I looked at each of these components having to do with classroom management, where would I rate myself and what could I do better? So if I look at these, if I just pick a random one, activities have a clear functional purpose to support the lesson taught. How would I rate myself on that? And then what could I do better? And then if you're an administrator or a coach, you could use this as like a checklist when you do walkthroughs. Because again, we know that effective instruction cannot take place in a poorly managed classroom. It just can't happen, because if the students do not know what's expected of them, if the students do not know how to behave, do not know what the expectations are, it makes it very, very challenging for them to learn. So again, the link to this is in that handout. And I think whether you're an administrator or a teacher, it's a really helpful tool to just think about what can I be doing better to make sure that my students are getting the most effective education that they can. So with that being said, I just talked for 35 minutes straight. Does anybody have any questions about what we just discussed? And Rabia, thank you for resharing that link for people who came in late for the tiny URL for the handout. All right, I will stay on for a few minutes after I stop the recording if anybody wants to hang on and ask questions. I did just put a form in the chat. I would appreciate if you could fill it out because we do always love feedback on these webinars. We do them every month on different topics. So we like to improve and get better and make sure that we're providing topics that are helpful to all of our audiences. And then also, again, in addition to the handout, if you need to contact me, my email address is right here. Our website, we have tons of free downloads and then descriptions of all of the services that we offer. So I do appreciate you coming. If you couldn't come and you're watching the recording, I appreciate you taking the time to watch the recording. And if you're watching the recording, you can reach out to me and get a copy of the handout if you cannot access the tiny URL. So thank you again. I'm going to stop recording. And if anybody wants to stay on and ask me questions, please feel free. Thank you again.